Are there any secret rooms that we can't see?
Here,
Okay.
that's the only
Do you know where the other ones are? The secret rooms?
secret room.
Yeah, behind a wall or something like that.
Many, many hours of investigation going to the Philippines, going to Chicago, going all over the country. There's not one scrap of evidence that Michael Jackson ever harmed a child, did anything wrong, committed any crime. It's almost a vindication when you look at this. The FBI looked at all of these matters and said, there's nothing here. And I think that's the most startling thing which I've seen.
In 1984, 2 agents were assigned to follow Michael Jackson everywhere he went, and what they documented would remain classified for decades. Chapter 1. Michael Jackson wasn't just the biggest pop star on the planet. He was a target. While millions screamed his name and Thriller dominated every radio station in America, federal agents were building a file, page by page, photo by photo. The FBI dossier on Michael Joseph Jackson would eventually span more than 600 pages, and it started long before anyone realized the king of pop was being watched. The surveillance began quietly in 1984, the same year Michael swept the Grammys and MTV played nothing but his videos. But the FBI wasn't interested in his moonwalk. They were concerned about something much darker. See, Jackson had received death threats, hundreds of them, fans obsessed beyond reason, extremist groups who saw his influence as dangerous, anonymous letters promising violence if he performed in certain cities. The FBI's Threat Assessment Unit flagged him as a high-value target requiring active monitoring. What started as protective surveillance evolved into something far more intrusive. Agents embedded themselves in his security detail. They monitored his phone calls. They tracked his movements across state lines. Every hotel, every studio session, every private meeting was logged in triplicate. And Michael had no idea just how deep the scrutiny went. He was being protected, sure, but he was also being profiled. The Bureau wanted to know everything: who he met with, what causes he supported, where his money went. Because in the eyes of federal intelligence, Michael Jackson wasn't just an entertainer anymore. He was a person of interest. And the deeper they dug, the stranger things became. Chapter 2. By 1985, the FBI file wasn't just about threats anymore. It was about influence. Michael Jackson had power that transcended music, and that made people in Washington very nervous. When he acquired the Beatles catalog for $47 million, alarm bells went off in multiple government agencies. Not because of the music rights themselves, but because of what the purchase represented. Financial leverage, cultural control. A black man owning the most valuable intellectual property in entertainment history. But it was his humanitarian work that really intensified the surveillance. Jackson donated millions to civil rights organizations. He funded hospitals in countries the US government considered politically sensitive. He met with leaders in Africa and the Middle East, sometimes without State Department approval. To the FBI, this wasn't charity, it was potential liability. They tracked every donation, every foundation, every overseas trip, looking for connections to groups they deemed subversive. Then came the Victory Tour incident. During a stop in Philadelphia, Michael received a package backstage. Security intercepted it before he ever saw the contents. Inside was a crude explosive device, amateur but functional. The FBI investigation that followed went beyond finding the sender. They wanted to know if this was part of a larger conspiracy, if organized groups were coordinating attacks, if Michael's public statements about racial equality and economic justice had made him a target for domestic extremists. The file grew thicker. Agents interviewed venue staff, bodyguards, even fans who wrote him letters. They cross-referenced names with known activist groups, with foreign nationals, with anyone who might pose a national security concern. And somewhere in that process, the line blurred. Were they protecting Michael Jackson, or were they monitoring him? Because the reports started documenting things that had nothing to do with his safety, his relationships, his spending habits, his private beliefs. You have to wonder what he would have thought if he'd known every conversation might be recorded, every friendship analyzed for hidden meaning. The surveillance wasn't slowing down. It was accelerating. Chapter 3. In 1989, something shifted in the FBI's approach to Michael Jackson. The files stopped being purely defensive and started asking questions that felt invasive, personal, almost accusatory. Agents began compiling psychological profiles based on interviews with former employees, analyzing his behavior patterns, documenting his eccentricities as if they were evidence of something criminal. His Neverland ranch became a focal point. The Bureau tracked construction permits, interviewed contractors, cataloged the property's layout with satellite imagery. Officially, this was standard procedure for high-profile individuals with security concerns. Unofficially, they were building a dossier that could be used for entirely different purposes. Reports detailed the exotic animals, the amusement park rides, the private theater. Everything was noted, categorized, filed away. But the most disturbing aspect of this period was the FBI's interest in Michael's interactions with children. Long before any allegations surfaced publicly, agents were documenting his friendships with young fans. They interviewed families who visited Neverland. They collected statements from people who attended his private events. The reports during this time were clinical, observational, but the implication was clear. The FBI was looking for something. Whether they found it or simply documented what they saw remains ambiguous in the declassified files. But the fact they were looking at all suggests they had suspicions years before the world did. And here's what makes this so unsettling. Michael Jackson was never charged with a crime during this entire period. No arrests, no indictments. Yet the surveillance continued unabated, expanding in scope and intensity. By the early 90s, the FBI had files cross-referencing him with over 200 individuals, tracking his international travel, monitoring his business dealings in 14 countries. For a man who'd never been convicted of anything, the level of scrutiny was extraordinary. It suggests the Bureau knew something, suspected something, or was preparing for something they believed was inevitable. The question nobody could answer was simple. What exactly were they waiting for? Chapter 4. When the first allegations hit in 1993, the FBI file exploded. What had been surveillance became active investigation. The Bureau coordinated with local law enforcement, shared intelligence, provided resources for what would become one of the most scrutinized cases in entertainment history. But here's what most people don't know. The FBI had been building a separate file, one that tracked not Michael's alleged crimes, but the people making the accusations. They investigated the families, their financial situations, their legal representatives, phone records showing communications between accusers and tabloid journalists. The Bureau documented meetings between attorneys and media outlets, traced payments, analyzed timelines, and what they found complicated the narrative significantly. Multiple instances of coordination, evidence suggesting financial motivation, patterns that raised questions about credibility and intent. This doesn't mean Michael was innocent or guilty. It means the FBI's investigation was more nuanced than the public ever realized. They were looking at everyone involved, and the picture that emerged was messy, contradictory, filled with competing interests and questionable motives on multiple sides. Agents interviewed hundreds of witnesses. Some corroborated allegations. Others directly contradicted them. The file became a maze of conflicting testimonies, each one documented with bureaucratic precision. What's remarkable is how much of this remained classified for so long. The FBI released portions of the Jackson file after his death, heavily redacted, with entire sections blacked out for reasons of national security and ongoing investigations. National security. Think about that. What could possibly justify that classification unless the surveillance had uncovered connections to things far beyond celebrity scandal? Unless the Bureau had documented relationships, transactions, or communications that implicated others in positions of power. The redactions tell their own story. Whole pages where you can only see a few words, names completely obscured, dates and locations visible but all context removed. It's like reading a book where someone tore out every other chapter. You know something significant happened, but you're left to fill in the blanks yourself. And that absence of information becomes more haunting than any revelation could be. Chapter 5. Here's what the declassified documents finally revealed in 2009, and it changes everything you thought you knew. The FBI wasn't just watching Michael Jackson because of threats or allegations. They were watching him because he was connected to a network of offshore accounts that moved hundreds of millions of dollars through shell corporations in Panama, the Caymans, and Luxembourg. These weren't just tax shelters. According to the files, federal investigators believed Jackson's financial infrastructure was being used by multiple high-profile individuals to hide assets, evade taxes, and potentially launder money from undisclosed sources. The investigation codenamed Melody tracked these transactions for 8 years. Michael may not have been the primary target, but his business managers, his attorneys, and his financial advisors were all under scrutiny. The FBI documented meetings in Switzerland, wire transfers to accounts held by entities with no clear ownership, and a complex web of financial relationships that connected Jackson to executives in banking, entertainment, and international business. Some of the names in those files are still redacted today. People who've never faced charges, never been publicly linked to any wrongdoing, but who appeared repeatedly in surveillance reports alongside Michael's inner circle. And here's the part that should terrify you. The FBI suspected that Michael himself didn't fully understand how his money was being moved or who controlled it. Agents interviewed accountants who admitted Jackson rarely reviewed financial documents in detail. He trusted people who may have been exploiting that trust for their own benefit. The Bureau found evidence suggesting millions were siphoned from his accounts over the years, hidden in legitimate-looking fees and expenses, funneled to offshore entities that served interests far removed from Michael's career. This wasn't about protecting Michael Jackson anymore. This was about following the money to much bigger fish. And when you realize that, the entire surveillance operation makes sense. He was leverage, a window into a world of high-level financial crime that the FBI had been trying to crack for decades. They watched him for 23 years, not because of who he was, but because of who he knew and what they could learn by staying close. Chapter 6. Michael Jackson died in 2009, and the FBI officially closed his file. But the questions it raised will never be fully answered. 600 pages of surveillance, and we've only seen a fraction of it. The rest remains classified, locked away in federal archives, inaccessible even through Freedom of Information requests. The official reason is privacy and ongoing investigations. But investigations into what exactly? Michael's been gone for over a decade. Unless what they documented implicates people still alive, still powerful, still untouchable. Think about what we know. Years of surveillance that started as protection and became something far more invasive. Financial investigations that connected Michael to offshore networks and powerful individuals whose names we'll likely never learn. Allegations that were investigated from every conceivable angle, producing evidence that supported multiple conflicting narratives depending on which documents you read. And through it all, a man who was simultaneously one of the most famous people on earth and one of the most isolated, surrounded by people who may have been using him, while federal agents documented everything from the shadows. The tragedy isn't just what happened to Michael Jackson. It's what his story reveals about how power actually works. How surveillance is justified in the name of protection until it becomes a tool of control. How fame makes you visible while leaving you utterly vulnerable to forces you can't see or fight. The FBI watched Michael for 23 years and found threats, suspicious finances, contradictory testimonies, and a web of relationships that implicated dozens of others. But they never found absolute truth. Just pieces of a story too complex for any single narrative to contain. And maybe that's the real revelation, that even with unlimited resources and decades of investigation, some mysteries remain unsolved, not because we lack information, but because the truth is uncomfortable for too many powerful people to let it surface. If this story made you see Michael Jackson's life differently, consider subscribing. We dig into the documented facts behind the headlines everyone thinks they understand.